Hi, this is S.G. Brownlow. Maybe you know someone who has had something horrible happen to them when they were young. Maybe they got beaten or something like that. And sometimes they blame the people who beat them and they hate their stepmother, for instance. But they say they love themselves, or they say, well, my stepmother was really a good person, but I was really a SOB and I really pushed my stepmother into doing it. Either way is about the same. They either blame the stepmother or they blame themselves. Now, one good rule of thumb when you're seeing cases like this is that whichever one the person says is true, the other one is also true. If they say they hate their stepmother, they also hate themselves. If they say they blame themselves, they also blame their stepmother. Whatever they feel toward one is the same as what they feel toward the other. There's a couple of different ways of looking at that. One is sort of the typical clinical way, and we talk about internalizing and externalizing. And so, in general, males tend to externalize more, females tend to internalize more, and so acting out disorders are more common among boys. Depression, eating disorders, and those kinds of things are more common among girls. But either way, the blame flows both ways. And so a lot of times if somebody's blaming another person, it's important to help them come to the realization that they also blame themselves. Or if they're blaming themselves, for them to come to the realization that other people had a hand in why they feel so bad too, and that it wasn't a one-way street. There's another way of looking at it, though, that I think is sort of deeper than that, and that is to look at our nervous system. The nervous system divides in various ways, but one thing that we can talk about is our autonomic nervous system, which is basically our automatic ways of responding. And we've got two branches of that. We've got the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, the typical way of looking at that is that our sympathetic nervous system is where we see our stress. And we see stress build up. It's very fight or flight. And so it's important that we build up our sympathetic response during the day. And so sleep is important because that's when parasympathetic kicks in and we can rest the sympathetic. And so there's this idea that the parasympathetic is like the good one. It's the savior. It's the one that allows us sleep and digestion and sex and all of these kinds of things that we like. But that's really not exactly how it goes, because yes, the sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight, but remember there's fight, flight, freeze, and the parasympathetic nervous system is freeze. The parasympathetic nervous system is system shutdown and pull into yourself. And so there are other emotional reactions that cause something like freezing besides anger. Sadness, despair, guilt, shame, all of those essentially pull us further into ourselves. We retreat into our shell. We're not out there in the world anymore. We're closer and closer and closer like this into ourselves. Those are all parasympathetic kinds of emotions. One thing you can say about parasympathetic emotions is that they're extremely painful. They feel like the life is being sucked out of you, because in fact the life is being sucked out of you. And if you stay in those parasympathetic states too long, then the life can get sucked completely out of you. And they are because of that, extremely stressful to stay that far out of balance for very long. And so typically what we do is we bounce back and forth. When we feel one of those, we bounce back and forth from a parasympathetic to a sympathetic state. And so we go from, for instance, shame to rage, which is a sympathetic kind of emotion, along with all kinds of anger and craving and pride. Those are the kinds of outward focused sympathetic emotions, which also tend to be defensive emotions. So when we look at how people are responding, either internalizing or externalizing, it really depends on whether their parasympathetic response or their sympathetic response is more dominant at that point with the same set of facts. I can feel guilty, or I can be angry and blaming. I can feel ashamed, or I can be rageful. I can feel sad, or I can complain. And all of those are ways of externalizing the same thing. But typically we pick one. And as I say, the further we get out of balance, the more it hurts and the more stressful it is. Now, finding that balance, you can actually balance the sympathetic and parasympathetic. And what you find when they're actually evenly balanced is acceptance. We don't blame ourselves. We don't blame other people. We just live with the fact that something happened and we accept it. We don't fight it. We don't surrender to it. We just acknowledge it and live with it. Now, if you're finding it hard to find acceptance in your life, contact me. There's a lot further to get than acceptance, but that's a good starting spot. And I'd love to help you get that far.